The Dr. Taz Show, the podcast. Dr. Taz, Superwoman Wellness. Here's Dr. Taz.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to this episode of the Dr. Taz Show, where, I'm determined to bring you back to your superpowered self. And today we're going to talk about something very near and dear to my heart, Ayurveda and fertility. Some of you know that I'm trained in Ayurveda and it's a part of my medical practice. But today I bring you Heather Grzych, who's the author of the Ayurvedic Guide to Fertility, which I believe I have lying right here and have been looking at. She bridges together the worlds of both conventional and alternative medicine to help women and men heal their physical and emotional lives. She's on the board of directors for the National Ayurvedic Medical Association and has consulted with doctors, governments, and even insurance companies. She lives in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I today am pleased to bring her on the show. We're going to tackle Ayurveda, fertility, and more, but welcome to the show, Heather. What inspired you to get into Ayurveda?
Oh my gosh. It was a windy path there for sure, because I found it later in my life. I don't know where you were in your life when you found it, but I was in my early to mid 30s when I even first heard the word Ayurveda. I think my parents probably still have difficulty pronouncing it. My parents thought I had joined a cult when I was in Ayurveda school.
My dad just asked me the other day, he's like, what's integrative medicine? I'm like,
yeah. So I, for many years, I actually worked in the health insurance industry. And so I was in charge of product development for a health insurance company and thought I was doing great work and getting people access to healthcare. I was working on Obamacare and things like that. Mm-hmm. And when I was in my sort of early to mid 30s, I went through this. I hadn't had children yet. I was sort of trying to find myself. I started teaching yoga, went through this whole new, thing as many women do when they start teaching yoga. Had my own little eat, pray, love moment at some point. Yeah. And then the path that I was on, I studied yoga and then I studied yoga therapy.
Yeah.
And became a yoga therapist and I started teaching yoga therapists. And then when I found yoga therapy was when I first heard about Ayurveda. And I was about 32 at that point. And immediately when I first learned about it, it was just like a gut punch. And my little voice in my head just said, why doesn't anybody know about this? And it just immediately tapped me into something that felt like it'd been missing for a long time. And so I just kept following it, going, what is this weird thing that is completely impractical? There's no job description. It's not even a licensed profession in the United States. Why do I need to know about it? And I had my corporate job, but I studied and I entered into a master's program on the side while I was doing that. And then at a certain point, I left the corporate job and stuff. But for me, Ayurveda was like just this missing thing in my life where I feel, I know you also study Chinese medicine. Mm-hmm. For me, Ayurveda just tapped me into something that felt like it was missing. And because of the time of my life where I was studying it, I hadn't had a child yet myself, and I was thinking about having a child, that was a critical point for me to be going through that educational experience, because I was thinking, am I going to be a mother? I was already at that point in my mid 30s and I was starting to worry about it, like many mid 30s women, professional women do, or otherwise, who haven't had children yet. And so it was on my mind a lot when I was in school. Mm-hmm. But Ayurveda, it's such an amazing science, and considering that it's so ancient and it's been around for so long in India, and we're only beginning to learn about it here in the US. I'm actually preparing to interview one of my mentors tomorrow. And I was sitting here thinking how different for him to grow up in India, where Ayurveda is this sort of more well-known thing that's part of the fabric of the culture there. Whereas here in the United States, so many people don't actually know what it is. And so for me, it felt like I was swimming against the stream a little bit when I started studying Ayurveda.
Well, the journey into Ayurveda, many of us get there through a personal journey. That's what landed me in Chinese medicine too, just my own health issues. Mine was a little bit earlier than yours. It was my late 20s when I was starting to have a lot of my problems, and a lot of mine were very hormonally based. And I think what's so fascinating about Ayurvedic medicine and Chinese medicine too is that they are able to really get to the root of these issues that conventional medicine will often say, like, well, take this drug or do this one thing to fix this system, and not really tie it into the network of the body, or the overall health of the body. You deal with a lot of fertility and infertility issues in women as an Ayurvedic practitioner. And tell us a little bit about that particular problem or issue that we're seeing today, because more and more women, I think, are having trouble getting pregnant. More and more women are looking for alternatives because we are starting to understand the devastating consequences of IVF that have on our bodies and what it means for our long-term health. Talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing with women and why they're having so many issues getting pregnant.
Yeah, I mean, certainly statistics will tell us something. The statistics will tell us that women are having babies later. The statistics will tell us that we're having fewer babies than we did in 1960, that, say we're having half the babies that we had in 1960. We also have a really big population, which we didn't have in 1960. We didn't have nearly as many people. So the back of my mind, I'm always wondering, well, do we need to have so many kids, And but the problem is that once a woman decides she wants to have a kid, get the hell out of her way. So I actually think that's the biggest problem, is that once we desire that and it doesn't happen immediately for us, our threshold for dealing with the unknown, our threshold for dealing with the surprises that life does or does not, bring us, just that the unknown factor, our threshold's really low for that. We as women have gotten very good at making stuff happen. We can get great jobs, we can do great in school, and but fertility is a different animal because we can't control it.
Right.
And that's very frustrating. Now, that's the psychological piece of it. There's also physical pieces. Obviously, women, are they less healthy than they were, in 1960? Well, I don't know. Everybody was smoking and drinking in 1960, right? So it's hard to tell if we're healthier, but we know that, and I don't know, I don't have digestive, I don't have gut data from the 1960s or 70s, but we do know that anywhere from like half to 70 something % of people are experiencing regular digestive issues. Right. And if we're talking about fertility, the way I look at fertility, I look at it as this, it's sort of a byproduct of health. And health is a byproduct of proper digestion and nutrition and assimilation. So if our bodies are not essentially, we're getting lots of great stuff, we're taking lots of great stuff in, we're not turning it into something in a beneficial way, it's creating all sorts of problems. We're not digesting it. We're having digestive issues. We're having metabolic issues. It's causing plaques in our bodies, whatever the thing that's happening. And that ultimately will also affect fertility. So I think probably stress and digestion has a huge piece with it as well, which is interesting because before the pandemic, we knew everybody was so stressed out, commuting, driving to work, all the ambitions that everybody has, right? That Rajasic sort of overly ambitious state that many of us found ourselves in at that time. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, no, stay home.
Yeah.
And if you talk to some women, they're actually really having like more peace right now because the chaos has decreased in their life. And so where it's going, I don't know, but where it is now, where it was before the pandemic, was that people were having more and more difficulty. They're waiting longer, and also our patience is thinner. Mm-hmm. So when I was 35 years old and thinking about, oh crap, I haven't had a kid yet, the thought of me doing IVF was not even an option. Like mm-hmm. in my head, I just said, and I knew it was available. I knew people were doing it. I knew people who'd done it, and I knew I didn't want to do that. And I knew it was never going to be an option for me. So I said, if I don't get pregnant naturally, if it doesn't happen naturally, then it's not in the cards for me. That was the approach that I took to it. And I said, let me make sure that I love my life so much that regardless of what happens with this baby thing, I'm just happy. I can, dedicate my time to helping some population or starting a business or whatever I have to do. The patience is thin for a lot of women. And I had these little thoughts creep in too. Do I want to, go get I did have hormones checked and stuff like that when I was in my late 30s. You have to put your mind at ease with certain things, but I just knew that path wasn't for me. And that's what I wrote about in the book. I wrote about the natural path. However, I will say that I do work with quite a few women who are going through fertility treatments, as I'm sure you do as well. And I actually don't think it's, you can't do I think you can still do Ayurveda and Chinese these other treatments while you do them for sure. And obviously, like you were saying earlier, there are a lot of side effects from the medical assisted route. And I think that we can help in between the phases that they go through in those treatments. Definitely. We can really step in and like help kind of cleanse things out so that they're receptive to that next event that's going to happen in the pathway.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I think it's not clear where it's going to go. For women's health in the future and for fertility in the future, there is also this very mysterious connection between death and birth. Mm-hmm. So I mentioned this in the book, and I found this data point, I don't know, 6 years ago or something. And it really surprised me as I was looking at birth rates in different countries and Yemen and Syria and Afghanistan and sort of war-torn countries or countries with famine or countries where you wouldn't think there's a whole lot of stability, like where your logical mind would say that's not a safe place to have a baby.
Right.
Your logical mind would say that, but the birth rates are really the highest in the world.
Yeah.
And yet, well, I don't know, I have some of my woo-woo friends have certain theories about that, that the something about the souls moving around and, having to, when they leave, they have to come back or something like that. But I think maybe there's a piece of that. I'm not really super connected with those kinds of dimensions, but I think that there's something about when you touch your primal being where there's something about, I don't know if it's the fear of death or feeling emotions flow through you, feeling the effects of a loss in your body and letting that loss pass through you, and then allowing that leaves a space for something else to fill inside of you. That's at least, that's what my gut tells me. That's the visceral sense that I get about it. I don't have none of my teachers ever taught me anything about that. Right. That's what it feels like to me. And that's sort of, I think that's one of the reasons that I frequently do fasting with women during this process, because it's about getting in touch with that sense of loss, getting in touch with the non-grasping mechanisms, that being empty, that receptivity for the new and things like that. And if we get everything we want, we have everything we want, and all the spaces in our house are filled, and our hair looks perfect and everything looks perfect, and is there a space in there for something new to come in?
Interesting.
Get inside.
I thought about it that way. So talk to us about this idea of the modern women having, kind of piggybacking off what you just said, having that primal mind and having an intellectual mind. And I would almost argue that our intellectual mind has served us well from a career and maybe even a financial standpoint. I wonder how much it's disserving us when it comes to very feminine issues like fertility. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, every thought you have has an energy to it. And literally, if I sit next to somebody who's thinking a lot, I can feel that. I can feel the bouncing. It's like an energy bouncing through their head. So if you have a thought, there's a chemical action taking place. There's an action taking place. The brain uses so much energy. So the smarter we are, there's more energy. The more we're using that brain, there's more energy going there, right? Now, a lot of what I'm talking about is consciousness. And that's really, I think, when we talk, the way I wrote about the intellectual and the primal, and other people have wrote about this in similar ways, it's sort of consciousness or subconsciousness, or the conscious mind versus the wisdom of the body. And, even modern science tells us that 95% of what's operating us on a regular basis is subconscious, not conscious. So in reality, we're being run by this kind of pre-programmed or already programmed, these tapes that have already been going for a long time. And the conscious mind thinks it's in charge, and the conscious mind thinks it's got control over everything. And certainly if we're, kicking ass in our jobs and doing well in school and, getting promoted at work and landing the deal, or, getting the website up, or all the things that we're sort of accomplishing, that's all happening in the conscious realm. But there's so much happening in the other realm that is difficult to, when we dream and when we sleep, we get a taste of that realm. We may be able to tap into it. There are other ways that people have developed to tap into that. Artists have some pretty interesting ways to get involved in that dimension, or things like yoga, anything that you do with body to get more body awareness, to tap more into your emotional body. So there's certainly an emotional body component to it, because when you're sitting there thinking about being effective and all of those things, you're not thinking about your emotions, because your emotions require time to process.
Right.
Similar to like in Ayurveda, I don't know if you came across the word Vega, which is like the urges, right? That you're never supposed to stop once they start. So one of the urges is, sneezing or peeing or crying is one of the urges. And that's a function of your primal body.
Mm-hmm.
You have an urge to cry, maybe because you have a thought or you saw something sad, but once that urge comes up, it's a primal thing happening in the primal body. And there's a physiological thing that's happening. And if your conscious mind intervenes and says, nope, not okay to cry right now because your boss is right there, or you don't want to look like a wimp in front of your boyfriend, or whatever that tape is that comes in to your head, then you're actually blocking that energy. And so sometimes the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, or the primal and the intellectual, are not on the same page. And I think this even comes up sometimes in relationships. So your brain tells you, your mind tells you, your conscious mind tells you, I got to have this guy, with this kind of job, who's from this kind of family, or whatever the sort of checklist is that we put together.
Mm-hmm.
And then you walk by somebody and your body starts telling you something different.
Right.
And hopefully you're able to get those two levels on the same page, so that you pick the guy that, has all of those things. But sometimes the body, wants something that the mind does not want.
Fascinating. So how do we get more in touch? Because I think the disconnect, even when it comes to fertility, is this disconnect between the primal and the intellectual, right? So how do we, as women, get back in touch with that primal sense? Because you're right. How many times a day I'm thirsty. Oh, you'll get water later. I'm tired. Oh, you can sleep later. What's another one? I'm angry, whatever it is, like we suppress, ignore, because the mind is overriding kind of every primal need. How do you find balance between those two things so that they're more unified, and that you can then, first of all, feel better, live better, but then even open up the channels of fertility, because this is essentially opening up energy, which in Chinese medicine, we say the ren, or the conception vessel, needs to be opened up. Ayurveda has its own terminology for that. What would you tell women listening? Like, what are some practical things that they could do?
Yeah, I mean, meditation's obviously a great place. And I think many different things are a form of meditation, whether it's journaling or even a form of prayer that you can do. One of the practices I love that I wrote a little bit about in the book, but not too much. I love a chanting practice.
Hmm.
And it's also interesting because in the Ayurvedic text, in one of them, Charaka Samhita, they talk about how like the indicators of fertility, what the indicators of fertility are, how you know somebody's fertile. Isn't that funny? And one of the it's not like is her cervix in a certain position. It's not the stuff that we're checking for, by the way.
And my mother-in-law tells me it's my hip size. So anyhow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyhow.
Yeah, how she looks in that dress.
Yeah.
So one of the indicators of fertility in the Ayurvedic text, which is kind of cool, is that she has a good quality voice, which is kind of interesting because voice is such a subjective thing. Because you could hear some voice, you could hear somebody's voice and think it sounds like music, but that same person could hear that voice and think it sounds like somebody scratching a chalkboard. So I think it's probably a very particular thing, but as a woman I guess if you're going to be judged as by somebody as, are they going to be detecting a good quality voice or, that sort of primal stuff that is being picked up on? You don't want to sit there and go, I want to make my voice sound good for everybody around me. You want to make sure your voice sounds like a way where it feels amazing inside your body.
Right.
Because why would you try to do anything different than that and make your life more difficult? So one of the practices that I do with my clients and that I wrote a little bit about in the book is to help women. And by the way, I'm not a singer. So, when I say that I do this, it's not, I'm not a professional singer or anything, just chanting and sitting alone in your house. And if you're just saying Om, go for Om, but maybe make other noises like O or Ah or Oo, and then just see where it goes, because there's a way that you can focus on your voice coming out of your body. There's a way that you can focus on it, which is I want to make sure everyone around me likes the way I sound.
Right.
Or you could focus on, I want to feel, I want it to feel amazing as it moves through my body. Or maybe you could focus on both even.
Huh.
So, I just think that that's an amazing place to be, because the baby that is meant to be your child doesn't need you to be anybody than who you really are. And so to me, I find that to be an interesting way to transcend the social conditioning piece.
Yeah. I love that. I think chanting, singing, meditation, yoga, prayer, these are all things that force us out of here to a certain extent, right? You said fasting even. Would fasting be in that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, fasting is not for everyone for sure, but the word fasting in Sanskrit is upavasa, and to go without food, and it means to stay close to one's soul.
I love that.
Right?
Yeah, that's so powerful, to stay close to your soul. I could talk to you about all of this for probably another hour, but I don't want to leave this discussion with you without kind of going over the 4 fertility factors in Ayurveda. What are the 4 things that they really pay attention to? You mentioned it, but let's go over that for everybody listening, because they're different from some of our Western markers. It's not all AMH in Ayurveda. So tell us.
Exactly. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what it is in Ayurveda.
Yeah. So Ayurveda is poetry. The Ayurvedic texts are written in poems. This is a medicine that speaks to your heart. And that's another way that we get out of the head. So the way that there's essentially a metaphor used for fertility in the classical Ayurvedic texts. And I, packaged it up and called it the 4 fertility factors, but this has been written about since 600 BC.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's essentially a gardening reference. And everybody's doing that more now in the pandemic. Everybody's planting things. And so maybe some good things are coming out of this as well. And we can get more in touch with our connection to the earth. We've got four fertility factors. The first one is the seed. So the egg and the sperm, just, common sense, they're both seeds, and they get, the egg, and then the sperm fertilizes it. And then that's the first factor. And the second factor is that'll happen when the time is right. So the timing, the sort of seasonal factors, the time, and season is one way to look at it. And it's funny because when we talk about animals, when it's their time to mate, we say they're in heat,
right,
or in season, right? So it's sort of that season for fertility. And for women, it's, when you're ovulating, and for women, or just after you're ovulating, and for women, it's during the phase of life where your body is more able to withstand the hard work that birthing and growing a child requires. Unfortunately, we have a biological clock, but there's some benefits to having a cutoff on that too, so that we're safe in our, if we were trying to have a baby at 60,
right.
So we got the seed, and then it's the timing for those seeds. You're not going to plant spinach at certain times of the year. You're going to plant spinach in the soil at the time of year where spinach is supposed to be planted. So I have some growing on my deck right now, and it was a pain, that one. Every seed has its own requirements for what it's going to grow in too. So you've got the third fertility factor, which is the field. And you could think about that in most literal terms as the uterus. So the word kshetra means the uterus in Sanskrit, and that is the place where obviously the zygote will implant, and where the placenta and everything will end up forming inside the uterus, and the baby grows there. And so that field is what receives all of the fourth fertility factor, which is the water. So the blood, the nutrients, everything comes as nourishment in water for a baby. The baby gets, is not breathing air outside of the body. It's not, putting chocolate peanut butter cups in its mouth. It's getting mommy's liquid in her body, and nourishment and love. So there's the seed, there's the season, there's the field, and then there's the water. And there's a few of those that you don't have control over. Like, you don't have control over the season. That's an environmental factor.
Right.
You have to pay attention to the season and adjust accordingly. Or the seed, you can't really, you were given, your follicles. You can take care of the vessels where the follicles are and things like that. But there's certain things you can and cannot affect with that. And then the field, though, you can affect. I think that's the field and the water are the biggest areas of opportunity for people to affect their fertility, and where I spend a lot of my focus. So the field that uterus lives inside of a woman's body and is affected by, oftentimes people don't even have a problem with their reproductive system, but they have a problem somewhere else in their body, and then that can cause a fertility issue. Or there's stress in your environment. So everything is sort of converging in this uterus, but it's all being affected by a greater field, the house, the community that you live in, the conditions of the soil on the planet that your food is grown in. Everything affects your uterus, some closer and some farther away, but that's all part of the field. And then that water, when you choose to give yourself love, how you nourish your body is how you're going to nourish your baby, because that's how it all, starts forming. So those are and it's really pretty. It's like, it's just so poetic to think about it that way. Right. And it just makes your heart sing to think about it that way, instead of, getting, like, oh, is my FSH here? And my, like you were saying.
I love it. There's so much more we can talk about from this book. And the book, again, is the Ayurvedic Guide to Fertility. When was this released, out of curiosity?
It was May of 2000, right in the middle of the pandemic, when everybody's afraid to have babies.
Oh my gosh, I love it. So, if folks want to get in touch with you, Heather, what's the best way for them to do that. And I'm assuming this is sold everywhere books are sold, correct?
Yes, the
Okay.
Ayurvedic Guide to Fertility is sold on Amazon, where a lot of people shop. It's sold on Barnes and Noble, and it's also sold on Bookshop. And you can learn about the book or me and my work that I do with people on my website, which is www.heathergrzych.com. My last name is GRZYCH.com. It's not an easy one. You'll have to look at Dr. Taz's show notes probably to get that one.
No worries. We'll put it all there for all of you. And thank you again for joining us on this topic. We could probably do another hour on it. So I might have my team reach back out to you. But this is such an important topic for so many of you out there. We talk to women all the time struggling to get pregnant, not understanding why they're not getting pregnant. And also, we didn't even have time to dive into kind of the psychological aspect of some of this too. So still a lot to cover when it comes to this particular topic. But for today, thank you for joining me, Heather. I appreciate it. And for everybody else watching and listening, thank you for joining this episode of the Dr. Taz Show. Remember, we're on Spotify, so please rate and review it and share it with your friends. And I will see you all next time.